The year was 1995, and the Sony PlayStation... Wait. The date was a few weeks ago, and the game every Suikoden fan has been waiting for, except Suikoden 6, got released on the Nintendo Switch, PS5, Xbox One, and Steam. That game is Suikoden I and II HD Remaster. I've been playing Suikoden games for over 25 years, and it is one of my most favorite video game franchises ever. In fact, Suikoden 2 easily makes my list of personal top 5 games of all time. For this review of Suikoden I Remaster and my next review of Suikoden II Remaster, I'm going to provide 2 reviews, what I consider the original game to be and what I consider this remaster to be, both within the time frame of their release. For Suikoden I here, I'm not going to give my usual long history of the game since that information is all available on websites such as suikosource.com, but just know that the game and series is loosely based on themes in one of the most classic and beloved Chinese novels called The Water Margin. This novel is where the series theme of 108 Stars of Destiny comes from, along with the naming convention for each of the stars on the tablet. For me personally, I would estimate that I've played through this game over 10 times, and even did a full playthrough a couple of years ago on this channel, which you can obviously watch at any time. To note though, that was one of the first recordings that I ever did, so there are several audio issues that you'll have to look past. Believe it or not, I love this game so much that I have a VGA 90 graded copy of it. If you don't know what that is, it's a mint condition, unopened copy of the game that was graded and put into a UV resistant display case. To start this review off, I'll talk about the biggest update to the game, the graphics. First of all, I want to give Konami praise for creating new character portraits for every character in the game. If you played Suikoden any time before this release, you'll know portraits were something sorely missing in the game. I really enjoyed seeing the new versions of each character in a more modern gaming engine. They are all beautiful and really help connect the player to the characters in the game. I found myself really enjoying having other characters in my party than the standard 6 that I normally finish the game with every time. It felt like they were not nearly as useless and throwaway characters, with each having a unique portrait. My gripe with this, however, is that I wish the portrait and text boxes were a little bit smaller. I just feel like they take up a little bit too much of the screen, even though they do look great. Second, I'll discuss the overall UI changes. Along with the portraits, the UI menu has been very much overhauled. In Suikoden 1, the menu was extremely boring and bland. It has now been updated to include portrait bars of the party members, along with their remaining rune usages for each level of spell. This is a very welcome addition that I was excited to see. I'll also note that the overall menu is easier to read and includes other additional information that was not previously available. Of course, I do still have to gripe to go along with it. If you are like me, you play Suikoden with one hand, as the only buttons required to do everything in the game are the directional pad, select, L1, and L2. I used to be able to navigate Suikoden menus extremely quickly, from simple muscle memory, like using the blinking mirror every couple of minutes to get back to the castle. I do find that the new menu does take longer to navigate, which is a minor negative. Anyway, onto the main graphics. One thing I love is the HD 2D style that Konami has adopted here. All the backgrounds, the world map, spells, and anything that isn't a character sprite has been redone in the new visual art style. Most of it is gorgeous, like when visiting Leknot for the first time in her tower for the astral projections. The rework on the stained glass here is really cool to see. One of my favorite games of the last decade was Octopath Traveler, and I definitely got some of those vibes from this game. Another important thing to mention is that the game's visible viewing area has been expanded upon to adapt to modern widescreens, which I think is probably the best change of them all. This addition overall makes the game feel more expansive, being able to see more on each frame, whether in battle or in town. Other than the minor gripes that I mentioned, I'm really not sure what Konami could have done better here. Even some of the bland spell animations have been redone, and most spells look way better than they did before. Now onto the gameplay. I must say that prior to release, I was skeptical about the new ability to 2x or 3x the game speed. As a purist at heart, I like to take my time and enjoy things. However, I quickly remembered how much of a grind older JRPGs can be. The Suikoden series is actually one of the fastest, with the leveling system being very well balanced even 30 years ago. Unlike some of its contemporaries, there's not a lot of grinding required in the series unless you're grinding for random drops. In this case, I actually found the speed multiplier very welcome when farming drops like Rage Runes in Moravia or farming for Flowing Runes in Shasazarad. The very simplistic army battles remain largely unchanged here, where you get to play rock, paper, scissors with the enemy, albeit slightly more informed if you've recruited certain characters to gain an advantage. The number of Stars of Destiny recruited also determines how many different attacks that are available during these army battles, and if you're unlucky, the stars can actually be killed in battle, which would make the best ending impossible. Because of this, an army member loss should be seen as a definite reload to the previous save state. Speaking of rock, paper, scissors, I'd like to say that one of the best improvements in the game is the reworked dialogue during duels. In the original game, it was often very difficult to tell which kind of attack the opponent was going to do next, as many of the phrases were ambiguous and unclear. This new dialogue makes it much easier to determine what your next selection should be. I had zero trouble during one of the most important duels in the game, and there was no need to check Suiko source for what every prompt meant. As far as the difficulty, the game has 2 difficulties from the PSP port, an option that I think is pretty pointless in a turn-based RPG, to be honest. The original game was very easy to beat, and I feel like hard mode here I would just call normal mode. It simply makes the enemies a little bit stronger by some percentage and removes the ability to play through the entire game on auto battle. I found myself needing to heal a little bit more and strategize a little bit more with the attacks that I chose each turn, but in the end I was still vastly overpowered for any enemy in the game. If you're into minigames though, there are several of those here to choose from, some of which are required for story progression or character recruitment, such as the dice game with Tai-Ho. I will note that I hated the game with Georges just as much as I did in the 90s, and I wish the time targets had been increased slightly just to make it a little bit less cumbersome. As far as the rest of the gameplay, not too much has changed here. It's still the classic turn-based Suikoden people know and love. It's to note though that this version is based on the PSP version, which allows Tyr to move diagonally, which is something I am experiencing for the first time since I had never played the PSP port. My favorite quality of life feature, however, is the ability to run. Previously, in the original game, in order to not pull your hair out from walking so slowly, you had to stand outside Gregminster at the beginning of the game and kill mosquitoes for the Godspeed rune rare drop, which was mistranslated as the True Holy rune. You would then have to have that rune equipped on one of the party members in order to move faster. Thankfully, that is no longer an issue, and Tyr can run from the first second you gain control of him. I honestly can't thank Konami enough for this, as it prevents having to stall the natural flow of the game within the first 5 minutes to sit outside and grind mosquitoes for a half hour. Overall, the game is still very smooth, as it was 30 years ago, albeit now with faster loading times and some quality of life improvements. Before moving on, however, I simply have to address one thing about the original that was not fixed in the remaster and is extremely disappointing. The inventory management in these games is awful. Each character has a very limited number of items that they can carry, which also includes the equipment that they have on, leaving very little room to pick up the amalgamation of items out of treasure chests and from rare drops. While the games do give you a storage facility at the castle, even that is pretty lackluster and doesn't have enough space for everything. It's also a huge pain in the butt to change equipment and pass items to other characters with a full inventory, something that was thankfully approved upon in Suikoden II. Next, I'll talk about the music and audio. If you've watched any of my videos before, you'll know how much of video game music influences my opinion of the overall experience. While Suikoden I music is not in my top 10 list and definitely is not as good as Suikoden II in my opinion, I still can't think of a time where I felt let down or annoyed with any Suikoden tracks. There are some that are particularly good as well, like the track inside Scarlatisha. Or most people's favorites, all of the events surrounding Necklord. As far as the rest of the sound, I really didn't notice much of a change from the original game, other than some of the menuing sounds and battle sounds had been modernized. I personally didn't spend too much time thinking about them or noticing them, so I will simply say they are just about as serviceable as they were in the 90s. Finally, I'll talk about the story and my journey through the game. If you don't want spoilers, now is the time to move to the next section. The story in Suikoden I is quite simple, yet also complicated at the same time. The reason it's complicated is because most of the story that leads up to this game isn't well documented within the game itself, and comes from other Suikoden publications, such as the events that led up to the Scarlet Moon Empire and the battle between Barbarossa and Gale Rugner. The game starts off in Gregminster, with the main character Tyr going for an audience with Emperor Barbarossa with his father Tio, one of the great generals of the Scarlet Moon Empire. From there, Tyr is assigned to Commander Kraze to carry out trite tasks such as getting the astral projections from Magician's Island and wrangling up some thieves in Rockland. During the Rockland quest, the party goes through a cave, and Tyr's friend Ted is forced to use a mysterious magic against a Spider Queen boss in order to pass. Using this causes Barbarossa's court magician Wendy to sense the magic being used. Because of this, Kraze sets up a trap for Ted to meet Wendy, who uses the magic of the front half of her gate rune to try and get Ted's rune, the Soul Eater. Having to use the Soul Eater to defend himself, he gets critically injured from the devastating power of the rune and crawls back to Tyr's house, where he reveals the rune to the group and asks Tyr to take on the burden of carrying it, knowing that he's dying. We also find out that Ted has had this rune for over 100 years, even though he looks very young, because true runes give the host immortality from biological means, though not from outside attacks. With Pawn turning the group over to the Empire, Tyr becomes branded a traitor and is forced to leave town with the help of Victor. From here, we progress through the process of joining a rogue organization, the Liberation Army, watching the leader of this army die trying to save a child, and then Tyr subsequently becoming the leader of this army after recruiting military strategist Matthew Silverberg and capturing an abandoned castle, which is officially named Torin Castle, from what I still think is the most difficult enemy in the game, the Dragon Zombie boss. Without naming every detail, we then essentially embark on a quest to recruit Stars of Destiny, of which there are 108 in every Suikoden game, while also dismantling the plot of Wendy, who is using her special black runes to mind control all of the Empire's generals to cause war and strife throughout the Empire, including even killing a village of elves with a burning mirror, which was crafted from stolen blueprints from the Dwarf Village vault. Eventually, the group has to even fight Tyr's father Tio in an army battle, after which Pawn stays behind to fight Tio so the rest can escape. This is a major inflection point in the story that I need to mention because the outcome of this battle is a hard fork for the rest of the ending. Pawn must survive this duel with Tio in order to stay alive, which is a prerequisite to also revive another character later on. As such, it's important to have Pawn maxed out with weapon level and armor before the fight, which the player might not know to do, because Pawn is not in the party for very long before this occurs, and he's really not that good anyway. I mean, who would choose Pawn over Kai when you have a unite attack with Tyr like this one? After these events, the group also has an altercation with a boss named Necklord, who possesses a true rune himself and is a recurring character in the series. His dungeon is also my favorite in the game and even has a couple puzzles in addition to the simple, yet great music. The army also visits the Den of Dragon Knights and undergoes a quest to visit Seek Valley for ingredients to awaken all of the dragons and recruit the Dragon Knights to assist in the war. There are many details I'm leaving out, but the Liberation Army eventually crafts boats of ice to overtake the fortress of Shazarazad, claim the clan boss, and Sonyu Shulin, before the home stretch of the game, having a final army battle with Uber, another recurring character in the series. Retaking Gregminster, learning of the true nature of the relationship between Barbarossa and Wendy, and battling Barbarossa in his three-headed dragon form from the Sovereign Rune, we learn that the entire war was fueled by Wendy to gain possession of the Soul Eater, and Barbarossa was impervious to her mind control magic unlike the other generals, because the Sovereign Rune that he possesses nullifies the effect of all magic, even though we can damage the three-headed dragon in the final battle. Wendy and Barbarossa jump off the top of the garden, and the whereabouts of them and their true runes remain unknown to this day after 5 mainline entries in the series. If the player recruited all 108 Stars of Destiny, Gremio, who sacrificed himself earlier to save Tyr, will be resurrected from the power of the other 107, and the player will get the best ending. Before moving to the summary though, I'll provide a few tips and tricks in this section that are not glitches. First, at the very beginning of the game, the player can obtain one of 2 powerful runes by traveling to Sereday Village either alone or just with Ted. This decision happens very quickly, and as soon as Tyr returns to his house after accepting Kraze's orders, one of 2 things can happen. Tyr can immediately leave the house alone and grind levels, potch, and equipment to be strong enough to make it to Sereday himself, earning a fortune rune. If Tyr walks up the stairs instead, before leaving the house, he will be locked into having Ted in the party, and the same process will yield a prosperity rune. I personally find the prosperity rune more useful, as it reduces the time needed to farm potch for Pon's equipment and weapon levels needed to win the fight with Tio. However, the fortune rune is also nice, but I don't normally select it, though the prosperity rune can be gained later from a rare drop from sirens in the Kaleka area. I'd recommend getting to at least level 7 before heading up Mount Tiger Wolf, so you can release enemies, as fighting them is not a good idea at this point. Second, a quality of life upgrade is recruiting the character Kai as soon as possible. Kai has a unite attack with Tyr that hits every enemy on the screen for big damage and will make very short work of the first half of the game, if not further than that. Kai can be recruited at the Fortress of Garan immediately after obtaining Torin Castle, and I would highly recommend doing it then, especially on hard mode. Third, there are a few places I would recommend farming enemies for an extended period of time. The first of those is Panu Yakuta Castle, as many of the enemies there have nice rare drops and provide good experience in potch. The best part is that there's a nurse that will heal your party to full, unlimited times between every battle, so you can just spam your strongest attacks, heal up instantly, and then get into another fight. This is also true in Moravia Castle, where the player can fight ninjas for a ton of potch, or fight the soldiers for a Rage Rune rare drop, which is one of the best rooms in the game. There are other places and rare drops to farm for, but simply doing these 2 I think provides the player with a huge advantage and the most benefit for their time. So overall, this game and series has been one of my favorites for almost 30 years now. I'd give Suikoden 1, 2, 4, and 5 all perfect 10s if I was just being nostalgic. However, I'm still reviewing a game here. The original version of Suikoden 1, I would give a 7.5 out of 10. It was a really enjoyable experience, but definitely felt very unpolished at the time, especially with inventory management, a lack of character portraits, some translations, and some inconsistencies in leveling. It's also a very short and easy game, clocking in around 15 hours for the average run, but can be beaten in less than 8 if you know what you're doing. As far as the remaster here, I have to consider the fact that the game was released 30 years later. I will say that most of the issues from the game that could have been fixed have been fixed. From the ability to run, move diagonally, the characters having portraits, some of the translation fixes, some dialogue changes, many improvements are present here. The story and core gameplay remain unchanged, however, something that I'm not really upset about, but I also have to look at objectively from a wide lens. Given that this game was released 30 years later, I'd have to give it an 8 out of 10 with all the improvements. Regardless of the upgrades, the game is still short, still easy, and still suffers from a terrible inventory management system. However, it's overloaded with charm, 108 recruitable characters, quick and smooth battles, and a great story and backstory, albeit somewhat vague at times. I will say, I'm really looking forward to uploading my final save file into Suikoden II next, which is, in my opinion, one of the greatest games ever made, period. I hope you will tune in for that in the upcoming weeks, and while you are here, make sure to check out some of the other reviews like Mega Man X or Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I also want to mention my crypto and gaming Discord, which is linked in the description below. We're a very small bunch now, but always welcoming new folks. Thank you all for listening, I appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next one.